Hey everyone, I'm Chris Lesniak,
And I'm Rob Byer, and this is
the Debate Math Podcast.
Debating Mathy Topics and Mathy Pedagogy with Mathy people just like you.
Let's get into this month's debate. Well, hello and welcome back to our summer hot seat series. Today we're diving into one of the most talked about and often misunderstood topics in math education: memorization versus from memory thinking.
At first glance, they might sound like the same thing, but dig a little deeper, and you'll find a growing divide among educators, researchers, and even students. Should we be drilling multiplication tables and formulas until they're automatic? Or should we be building understanding without having to memorize in the traditional sense?
Our hot seat guest today will challenge the view on memorization, claiming that we should focus on from memory learning instead of memorization. It's a debate that strikes at the heart of how we teach, how students learn, and what it really means to know math.
Our guest has served in education as a classroom teacher, math instructional lead, and currently as a math specialist. His work with the math progressions and problem-based lessons has led him to present throughout North America and beyond. He is continually advocating for best practice in elementary mathematics by seeking new and innovative ways to support students and teachers in their development of conceptual understanding. He is a co-author of Building Fact Fluency, a toolkit for addition and subtraction, and he makes a mean curry. It's Graham Fletcher. Hey, Graham.
Hey guys, I'm super excited to be here with you both. Thank you for the opportunity to just chat about this in the open, so we can all get on the same page.
You tell our listeners where you are and what your current role is.
Absolutely. So as we just said, I'm currently a math specialist. I live in the Atlanta area, but you won't hear me say fixin', reckon, yonder, y'all, and that's because I'm from Canada. So you might hear an a or an about kind of along the way. My wife and two daughters, fixin', reckon, yonder, y'all, those are definitely words they use, and I hear very frequently around these parts.
And the question we want to ask all of our guests: when did math first become controversial to you?
Oh, that's such a great question, and I think it actually stems from when I was in elementary school. And I've had a love-hate relationship, but not in that order. I hated math growing up, and now I love math and supporting just teachers and students and not seeing it the way that I was taught to learn math. I come from British parents, and so everything was drill and kill. And I still remember to this day sitting in the back of my dad's Nissan pickup truck where there weren't any seats, but I could sit behind the seat. And he knew that we'd always have time tests on a Friday. And so I'd remember sitting in the back of that truck, and then my dad would say, well, you've got that test tomorrow. What's 8 times 7? And he could hear me just counting like 8, 16, 24. He goes, come on, Graham, you got to know these. Memorize harder. And I was like, wait a minute, memorize harder? Like, how do you memorize harder? And then when I became a third grade teacher, I had a wonderful math coach. And up until that point, I thought memorization was the way to go. And then when I had a third grade teacher, there was a math coach, and he really kind of opened my eyes. And then just seeing the way, just a different approach to math instruction just invited more kids into just enjoying math as opposed to hating it. So this topic is very, very personal for me, just because I wasn't a good math student. Like, I would be embarrassed to kind of show my GPA from high school and university. But then after that, I've kind of seen that math can be approached differently. So yeah, it's definitely something that is controversial for me.
Very good. Looking forward to hearing more. And with that, let's get into the debate.
We begin with the opening statement from our hot seat guest, Graham. Graham, you have 2 minutes, and that time begins now.
Awesome. So at the center of this debate is there's this conversation between memorization and retrieving facts from memory. And that difference, it really, truly matters. And as you'd mentioned, Rob, like at the surface, they can seem like they're the same thing, but they're really different. And that's why I'm so thankful to jump on here and have this conversation, because it's one that we need to have. So unfortunately, over the years, we've relied on time tests and value speed over sense making. They create anxiety, and they send a message message to students and also to parents that being fast in math is the same as being good in math. And that's not really true. So what I want to talk about today and kind of have this chat with you both about is this idea that memorization is passive. It's often repeated facts until they stick without understanding why they're true. It's very surface level. The fact may be in term like it might have short-term memory, but it's not deeply connected to anything. It's an isolated fact. It's about being told what to remember and not constructing that knowledge for yourself. But if we look at defining it, learning it from memory, if you learn it from memory, that's active. It's what happens when student understands number relationships and can reconstruct or retrieve facts because they've made that meaning. So when I think about this, it comes back to the research from NCTM and countless other just people who I've stood on their shoulders for years, where it defines that fluency is accuracy, efficiency, and flexible. But if we memorize, we're missing a few of those. It's not just about speed. So from memory is grounded in number sense, it's durable, it's transferable, and it's empowering. It allows students to marshal facts and then extend them. So we're after not just fact fluency, but we're looking at building numerical relationships. And so just kind of wrapping it up here. So my position is that fact fluency is critical. I think all three of us can definitely agree. Any teacher listening to the podcast will agree, but we need to build it from understanding and not from rote memory. When students retrieve these facts, they understand the math. They don't just survive it, they actually thrive in it.
Wow. Thank you, Graham. My wheels are turning already. In my line of work the past several years, this is a very hot seat topic, no pun intended. But so my question to you, to start this off, like memorization, automaticity, and fluency, oftentimes are used interchangeably. What's the difference between memorization, automaticity, and fluency? How are they connected, if they're connected at all?
Nice. So great question. And so I think, memorization, I think we can all agree on what memorization is, right? Like you learn something and you know it. But what happens with that idea of memorization is it's something can be quickly learned and then quickly forgotten. Like think about when we were all in college and we were studying to become a teacher. You do cram study from Monday through Friday. You take that test on Friday. And then if I asked you on Saturday what you studied for the entire week, you'd completely forgot it. So memorization, it can be built in short-term memory. So we get a false positive that kids have an understanding that they might not actually have. So this idea so what does automaticity look like in that? Well, automaticity is a little bit different, and it does align to not memorization, but from memory. And this idea of automaticity is that students are deriving a strategy and as they derive that strategy, it's through purposeful repeated practice of that strategy that then becomes automated. So many times it can look like, and it can appear like students have just memorized their facts, like 9 + 7, 16. Okay, great. They've memorized it. But in fact, they've actually repeatedly practiced that fact over and over through context, through word problems, through games, through images. And it's over time that then becomes from memory. It's that retrieval where it can be, where they know it. And if you ask them, how do you know that? They can normally back that up and with a strategy, they don't need to fall back to rote counting. So, and fluency, that comes back to that idea where we mentioned NCTM talks about accuracy, efficiency, and flexibleness. Well, if you just memorize your facts, you have the accurateness of it, but you don't have the efficiency and the flexible part of it. So an example of that would be if you ask a student, what's 8 × 7, which is research-based, the hardest fact that students need to know, that they tend to struggle with, is if students know like 8 × 7, and like, oh, I don't know that. Do they need to go back and skip count? Or can they use what they know about 7 × 7 and add another group of 7? And I think that's the flexibleness that fluency offers that doesn't happen necessarily in memorization.
So instead of, so for teachers who are focusing on this memorization, like you said, as a third grade teacher, that's what you knew, that's what you led with. So when we are talking with teachers about, leading with memorization, like what's the alternative to that? Like how do we cultivate this idea of like fact fluency, because that's the buzzword that everybody's, that's their pain point.
Yeah, and I know that we're talking a lot here about elementary school teachers, but this is scalable for so many reasons. Like when I'm working with fifth grade teachers might be saying like, how are my kids supposed to add decimals if they can't even add single digits? And whether you're a middle school teacher or a high school teacher, you've probably said the exact same thing. But for what from memory is it's building that numerical relationship. So if you just memorize, so let's just take the example that you talked about, Rod. Say someone uses flashcards and they're getting flashcarded and they memorize. So here's an example. So I could ask a student, what is 9 plus 7? So we'll go back to that example. And a student could say 16. Great. So they've memorized it. A student who might know that from memory is I could say, what's 9 plus 7? And they could say, well, I know that if I take 1 from the 7, give it to the 9 and make a 10, then I have 10 plus 6. But what happens when we go into second grade and now we need to add 59 plus 7? What ends up happening in that moment is you can't memorize what 59 plus 7 is. So now you need to go ahead and do some math there. Maybe you would just add the 7 and the 9 and you get 16, and then you add the 50. Very algorithmic in thinking. But we can use the exact same strategy to add 59 plus 7 that we add with 9 plus 7. But then when we get into fifth grade and we're adding 5 and 9/10 plus 1 and 2/10, we can use that same relationship of giving 1/10 from the 1 and 2/10 to the 5 and 9/10 to make 6 wholes. So what we have there are 3 different strategies, but really it's all the same property. And the property of making a 10 is the associative property. So that's the scalable thinking. So when we force that idea of just know your facts and memorize 9 plus 7, what we miss is that relationship, that understanding where students can now marshal the associative property when they're in fifth grade, when they're in middle school, when they're in high school. And that applies to fractions, it applies to decimals, it applies to all numbers. And I think the properties are the mathematical superpowers that we often gloss over early on, and so students can't marshal them when they get into middle school.
I'm liking some of this what you're saying, but I can hear teachers, parents just saying like flashcards worked for me, like memorization worked for me, like your dad in the pickup truck, quizzing you, like it just worked for me. So like why are we changing things? What do you say to them?
Yeah, and that's such a great question because it gets brought up a lot. And I think what happens is for everyone that says we just need to memorize our facts and flashcards worked for me, I think we've all ran into at least one person in our life that has said, I'm not a math person. And I think part of the reason of that is so for everyone who knows the fact, there's another person, another adult who doesn't know that fact. And it's because of that memorization to where it's just forced. There's a group of kids who are going to memorize it and they're going to be okay. But there's another whole group of students that eventually turn into adults that have just a bad relationship with math because ready, set, go, and the time test starts, and then all of a sudden we just shut down. And so the goal here is as much as we say, like, yeah, you need to know your facts, there's a lot of people who don't. And flashcards didn't work for them. So in terms of equitable practice, yeah, I don't know if I don't believe, and I'm kind of arguing. That's why we're here to have this debate. Is I'm thinking that's the reason why it doesn't work, is because it works for just a select few of students.
Kind of along with that, I think about like the bandwidth it would take. Well, what you're saying of like the regrouping the 9 and 7 to 10 and 6, and as kids move along in higher level math, especially like secondary teachers are going to say to me, like that's slowing them down. It's taking up a lot of their bandwidth in their brain, so they can't focus on the new topic or the new concept they're doing. So are we putting students at a disadvantage by having like them do this extra work?
Love that question. So the way normally I think in most, whether you're in Canada and you have learning objectives or you're here in the United States, we have 3 years to learn addition and subtraction, and traditionally 1 or 2 years to learn multiplication and division. And so what happens is when we talk about that idea of bandwidth, when we look at addition subtraction, that's 100 facts, and then you have 100 for multiplication and division. So we're asking students to remember and memorize 200 isolated equations. So when we talk about that idea of bandwidth, that's taking up a lot of bandwidth. And if we're cramming the facts, that doesn't allow us the time and opportunity to make sense of the learning. And part of that bandwidth is the sense making part of it. So a lot of the times it's focused on the right answer, but developing it over time. Like I think we've all been in that place to where students know the fact, and I'll have a student that would come to me and be like, "Hey, Mr. Fletcher, if you tell me if this is addition or subtraction, I can figure this out." And I would let them know, like, no, wait a minute. Knowing if it's addition or subtraction is the figuring out part of the figuring out part of it. So what happens is when we focus on just memorization, it's really just looking at isolated facts, not in context. So when we talk about building this from memory, it's built through context. It's built through problem solving. And fluency is an outcome of the problem solving. And that's where that from memory idea comes from, where so many times we might have the best week of teaching and kids have memorized their facts and they can have that just know the facts by Friday, but you come back in on Monday and they've completely forgotten them. And so that whole idea of bandwidth is we're cramming students to study, which basically becomes blocked or masked practice. So what ends up happening is maybe we go ahead and we say, on week 1, we're going to do our 1 times tables. On week 2, we're going to do our 2 times tables. And on week 3, we're going to do our 3 times tables. And it's quickly learned and then quickly forgotten. So we get this false positive that kids have an understanding that they actually don't have. So as much as we talk about that bandwidth, the more that we can give students the experience within facts to play in different contexts, that's what helps build that from memory. Because I think asking a 6 or 7-year-old to memorize 100 different facts, and that's even if they understand the inverse to operation, otherwise it's going to be 200 facts for addition and subtraction. So there's a whole bunch of sense making. And when students can make the connections, they actually, in the long run, become much more efficient.
So this idea of efficiency that you said, and it also makes me think back to like your story of being in the backseat of the truck or next to your dad in the truck and you're counting. So like if we have students who are, let's say 6th grade, okay, and they're in 5th or 6th grade and they are needing to somehow come up with 8 times 7 or somehow come up with 6 times 5. Is it acceptable for them to still be like counting on their fingers and using representations and models and things like that are found like within your kit? Like, is it acceptable for them to do that? And like, wouldn't it be easier for them just to memorize and just have those facts already converted?
So I think what happens there is students have the understanding of what multiplication is, and they know the facts. But when I think about how do we move student thinking from counting strategies to additive strategies to multiplicative strategies, and I think that's a big thing that we need to be aware of as teachers. And so I think about, I'll go to 3rd grade and then we'll jump up to 6th grade here in a moment. Is when I think about 3rd grade, once students understand the idea of multiplication and that it's repeated addition or skip counting, that's additive thinking. So how do we move students to multiplicative thinking? So if I'm a 6th grade teacher and I see a student going, well, I got to do 7 times, I got to do like 8 times 8, we'll say 8 times 8. And you're like, or 8 times 6 might be better for this example. So 8 times 6, and might be like, well, I'll see a student go 6, 12, 18, and they're counting along. And I'll be like, wait a minute. You said 6, 12. What do you know about 12? Can you double that? And then they get to 24. And then can you double that? And one of the best ways for students to see those patterns is by using a T-chart. So now what we're doing is we're giving them permission. And I think of what happens a lot of the time is that students don't want to move away from inefficient strategies because the emphasis has always been on getting the right answer. And for that 6th or 7th grade student, skip counting is safe for them. So asking that 6th grade teacher, how can you provide a space where students can then go ahead and think about that doubling idea, that multiplicative reasoning? And then once they have that, How do we give them purposeful practice? And for me, games are one of the best ways that we can allow students to build. I'm careful to use that word automaticity, but how can we give them that intentional, purposeful practice to see that doubling strategy of 6 times 8 or 8 times 6? And then giving them maybe that 5-10 minute space in the class to go ahead and practice that doubling, because eventually that's going to build into proportional reasoning. And we have so many students who can't reason proportionally because they're still stuck in additive thinking. But that multiplicative reasoning is the bridge, and that's developed early on. But if you just memorize facts, you're missing a huge opportunity for multiplicative that builds into proportional reasoning.
As you bring up games, I could just see some parents or teachers saying like, "Oh, this is going to be like fuzzy math. We're not going to get to the rich content. We're not going to be as rigorous or whatever." What do you say to that?
I think the games we use in math class, let's be honest, they kind of suck. And so being intentional about the games that we use. So a lot of the games that we use are just like dice generated worksheets. So I'm a big advocate of strategy based games, to where maybe students roll the dice, and then they have to make a choice. They can either double the dice, they can double the dice, which would be times 4, or they can double the double, which would be times 8. So the games then build the fluency and the reasoning that we're after, as opposed to just saying, all right, 6 times 8. It's not, because you can jump online and you can just do all of these games that are online, a lot of the games, but it's just, it forces that memorization. So if you send home that double game, then parents can't force the memorization because you're actually having to use the strategy. So the games that we use to support fluency haven't traditionally been good games. So how do we build better games into where when we bring them home to mom and dad or to the guardian, it actually supports the understanding that we're after and not necessarily just the right answers.
Okay. And my other question is that this need to speed kids up, like, do they get faster over time, or is it that guaranteed even? Because I can see teachers saying, well, there's time tests coming, like in high school, the SAT, the ACT, the AP Calc test, like all these things. There's huge time constraints, so they have to be able to, do some things quickly, factor quickly, multiply quickly without a calculator. And so are we robbing kids of the ability to speed, or can they build that speed up?
Yeah, I just lived through that world. We just had one of our daughters graduate. And so like that whole testing thing can be pretty rigorous. And so thinking about what does that look like? So if we go ahead and that time, I think it's more about, once students have the understanding, we want to give them that opportunity to repeatedly practice the strategy that they're using. And I think that's a big miss that we have. So we build the strategy, but then we move on to the next strategy and on to the next strategy and on to the next strategy. So what happens is students are collecting a bunch of strategies, but they never really own them. So what does it look like? Like one of the big debates that always gets brought up, like what time? Like, give me a time number. Like, we want to quantify everything. We want it to be like, is it 3 seconds? Is it 5 seconds? Well, if it's taking a student longer than 5 seconds, they probably aren't fluent. But I think to ask a student what's 7 times or what's 6 times 8, and to see them go 8, 16, 32, 64, that's fluent for me. That's with less than 5 seconds. I think anywhere between 3 to 5, but if we don't just know it, so often we think that they're not good at math, but there's actually underpinnings there of some really rich mathematical relationships. And I think in that high school realm, many students know the strategies, they just haven't been given those opportunities for purposeful practice. So that's kind of why I'm here, kind of like tackle this early on, so that when students leave elementary school, they're much more comfortable and fluent with these facts.
So this whole conversation has been about fluency and memorization with like facts. What about memorization with formulas? I mean, as early as 3rd grade, we start to try to force this idea of like length times width and base times height and all of these things, right? Base times height divided by 2 with my trapezoid people that are there. So anyway, so my question is like, so if we were like, what about formulas? Like, how do we build that? Should we be memorizing those, or should we not be memorizing those? Like, where does that fall within this whole memorization to memory conversation?
great. That I think that's another nugget, right? Because it's as if we're building this understanding, then it's scalable. And I think about like so often now, if I forget a formula, I jump online, I look up the formula, but it has to be the application of that formula in context. And so the important piece for me here is students should be deriving the formulas, but once they've derived the formulas, I'm okay giving them the formulas that they need. But so often, let's take volume in fifth grade, for example. Like we tell kids length times width times height, and all kids are doing is they're just memorizing three numbers and they're calling it a day. But if we build it conceptually and we look at it through a progression of learning, we go back to third grade and we look at how kids build area. Well, that's length times width. So when we get into fifth grade and now we're looking at volume of a rectangular prism, it's not length times width times height, it's base times height. And students now know that that base is derived from third grade. So it's important to be able to see the progression of how these things connect and build over time. Another good example of that would be in third grade, you could just memorize your facts, or you could learn to use it you could build a fact through the distributive property. And when we use that distributive property, then when we get into fifth grade and now we need to multiply mixed numbers, many middle and high school teachers will say, well, you can't multiply mixed numbers. You need to turn them into an improper fraction and multiply straight across. But you can actually still use that distributive property to multiply mixed numbers by multiplying the whole numbers and then multiplying the fractions. And then you could build that area model out. And so that distributive property that we've built in third grade, not through memorization, but through rich exploration and giving them that practice, it builds into factoring in middle school and then also into high school, which isn't quite my realm, but it also gets into quadratics. And a lot of high school friends that I've chatted with, like when we talk about that distributive model and it gets into quadratics in high school and completing the square, that's a big one for them. So there's a big connection there from taking the time to build fluency the right way in third grade so that it's scalable through high school and beyond.
Okay, and I think my last question for you is just about having resources. Like you mentioned this dice doubling game, like that sounds great, but like I think a lot of teachers and parents don't know where to do something that isn't like a straightforward worksheet or, flashcards or something like that. So can you point us in some directions of things to read or things to pull from that can be some good starting places?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the big eye openers for me was a book by Seymour, and it's called Nimble with Numbers. And there's a lot of really rich games in there. I can also share a couple games with you all that you can share with the listeners if they jump onto the homepage. A couple addition subtraction games, a couple multiplication division games that just help build these opportunities for students. Like once they know the strategy, let's just pump the brakes and allow them to kind of play in that strategy sandbox. So I can definitely share some games that we can share with the listeners, but I think Nimble with Numbers is a good one. NCTM has a lot of good games. As you'd mentioned, there's also the Building Fact Fluency toolkits that I created with Chris, our good friend, and Rob, our good friend, Tracy Johnson Sager. And so we put a lot of intentionality and thoughtfulness into how do we build this not from memorization, but from memory. So we can definitely share some resources.
Yeah, we'll put all that in the show notes. But I think that concludes our questioning round.
And now we will end by giving Graham a few minutes to make his final argument to you. Graham, floor is yours.
Awesome. So as we close, I just want to come back to what really matters. And it's helping kids build lasting fluency from memory and not that rote memorization. And so we need to stop using speed as a measure for success because we tend to continue to get those false positives. Time tests don't reveal what students understand. They reveal who can work fast under pressure. Some of our best thinkers are some of our slower processing thinkers. And oftentimes we never give them opportunities to invite themselves into the math conversation because there's been such a heavy emphasis on that speed. And so when students are raising their hand, we always get those 4 students who want to raise their hand and answer, and they save a lot of the other students in the classroom. So when the emphasis becomes on from memory, we give lots of opportunities, all students opportunities to kind of explore and play in that strategy and develop that strategy. But it also comes back to how do we give students the opportunity to purposefully practice the strategy that they've just explored. And so as we look to close, I just like to invite teachers to maybe think about this a little bit different. You might be a teacher who really just was able to memorize your facts, but how many of the colleagues and friends that you might know aren't comfortable with math? And so if we have a group of teachers who are comfortable or a group of parents who are comfortable and a group are not, how can we bridge this gap for them? And I think if we can begin to really identify the difference between what memorization is and the benefits of using from memory, we can really just invite more people into the math conversation.
Thank you. And that concludes this hot seat debate. I hope this gives teachers out there some really good food for thought.
And now it's up to our listeners to take a moment, ponder this hot seat discussion, share with friends, and consider what resonated with you. Be sure to follow us on Blue Sky at Debate Math to share your thoughts on this debate. What stood out to you?
And huge thanks to our guests, Graham Fletcher. Graham, thanks for being here with us and for sharing your thoughtful debate and pushing back on our questions.
Absolutely. I think it's something that definitely lives out there, and just thankful to the both of you for providing the space to where we can openly come together and have these conversations about math so we can all grow and learn, and kids win when that happens.
Also, thanks to all those who are listening, and we hope you enjoyed this and learned from this debate.
So as we wrap up, Graham, where can listeners find you and find out more about your work?
They can check out my website, gfletchy.com, where I share progression videos. I share lots of rich tasks, but that's kind of the hub for me, where I share all the goods.
Okay, we'll put all that in the show notes. Thank you. Want to learn more about incorporating debate activities into your math classroom? Go to luzniak.com/podcast to sign up for my mailing list and get your first set of example debate activities you could use with your students today. Go to luzniak.com/podcast.
Don't forget to reach out to us with comments and questions on debatemath.com, or follow us on Twitter at debatemathpod, and follow along with #debatemathpod.
Rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts
or wherever you listen to this podcast. Your feedback is super important to us.
Well, that's all from us.
Looking forward to debating with you more next episode. Until next time, cheers.